Can we reimagine the systems we live in? How can economics reflect our common humanity? And can we change it in time?
Welcome back to Real Time with Steve and Friends. Was the economy really that bad in 2024? We're going to find out today because guess what? We're going to talk about it. Be kind, stay safe, and enjoy the show. What would Scrooge make of deficits? If Die Hard was the neoliberal answer to Christmas movies, what should today's Christmas movie be about? Welcome to Real Time with Steve Kin and Friends, the Christmas/end of year special. That's right. No more Saturdays with us till January the 6th. We don't know how you'll cope, but at least for the next 2 hours, we are glad to have you. We're glad to have you anytime, but definitely for the next 2 hours. Now, if you've just joined us, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, as well as the bell, so you know when we're live next time. We've got an economic roundup of the year that was 2024. Was it bad? Was it good? The whole team is here for this. Steve, obviously, Mike and Ty as well, but Dan is back as well. Why don't we get Ty in here and get things started? Bring him on in. Here he is. Yeah, that's me.
Welcome back. And with that, I didn't have any Christmas bells or anything. Maybe I should have done that. But I didn't want to get too Christmassy because we're in that null zone between when it's okay to really start talking about Christmas and when you can actually start playing the music. So, you know, it's in the stores over here. I don't know about you guys, but you've got music in the stores. It starts too early. It really does.
So I've got a rule.
That's why I've gone with this.
Yeah, it looks good. I was going to wear my ugly Christmas sweater. I've got a rule. So my birthday is November 19th. And so after the 19th, that's when I put up the Christmas tree, right? That's kind of where it officially starts. And I'll go into shopping centers and absorb that Christmas music.
And be happy about it.
And be very happy about it. But come January 2nd, that tree comes down. Everything is done. It's over. It's back to reality. A new year. Tough times ahead. Here we go. Carry on. USA or Canada or UK, wherever you're from.
I think January the 2nd is when it comes down for us too. It is over. You're right. Exactly. It just goes boom, right. Reality check. I don't have to be nice to people anymore. That's not true. You're supposed to spread that out, that good feeling throughout the year. Do you? No.
You just save it up for when you're in trouble with your loved ones and for the rest of the year, whatever. Bank it up. Be hard.
Tell me about this, about the roundup that we're doing, Ty, and also there's a little bit of a reflection on the show because
it's grown a bit in the last year or two. So there's a bit of an update in the offing.
It has grown, and there's actually, it's more for the show. It's not just to reflect on 2024 and economics, because we reflect on every episode in a lot of ways, although we'll do some of that today. But really, it's a reflection of the show. That's we're 82 live streams in at 2 hours, so that's 164 hours of being on the air, and there's been a huge evolution over time. Like, we started this show November 4th, 2022. Dan, Steve, and myself, and the original plan was it was just going to be the three of us, a continuation of a show that Dan and Steve were doing the year prior, and we would just talk about economics. And I think the second week we had a group of guests on, and we're like, well, this is kind of interesting, maybe we can have guests each week. So it pretty quickly, within the first 10 episodes, we decided, okay, we're going to have a guest of the week kind of thing. And we stumbled around. This was my first attempt at live streaming, and we had a terrible intro. It was just a still picture with really irritating music. Steve's internet connection was always spotty at best. It's a little bit better now. Now, people might critique his mic and his video now, but it was hella worse back in the day. So we got to that. We got to about episode 16, and Mike came on as a guest. And we were really always want to try to focus on system dynamics, right? That methodology of modeling. That was, that's Steve's, and essentially his claim to fame, in economic modeling is using that technique. So we always wanted that feeling to the show. So we're like, Mike, just come back every week. And so he's been, from episode 16 onwards, he's been here every week. And in fact, I think he's been here more than Steve's been here, and has filled in as the kind of resident specialist. So that was good. And we went through 2023. We did a lot of episodes. I continued to refine, the graphics and the plot and the theme of the show. And then come September 2023, I did an update. And I realized, I did a little bit of research, right? Your thumbnail matters and your title matters. So we immediately went from, just a numbering of each episode with the guest names. Well, that doesn't matter. People don't give a F about, people's names on YouTube as a title. They want something clever that hooks them in, right? So that was our first big change, and our viewers doubled right there. Better thumbnail and better title. And so we went through 2023 like that, finished the year. We had you on as a guest towards the end of the year for the first time. And a few weeks later, we did our roundup for 2023. Steve did not show up. I decided that week I would go on an 8-month social media hiatus. And so I disappeared. So it was really just Dan and Mike. I told Dan, guess what? You're now the host of the show. I'm going on a break. If you don't host it, we're going to die. So he stepped in and kept the show going. We go into 20.
Well done, Dan. He's in the background, so I know you hear that. Hold it together.
We go into the background, or we go into 2024. We muddle the way through. Dan's like, I got to go do my book and some other projects here. I can't host this anymore. So who do I reach out? I reach out to the audio video guy specialist, Dave Folks. And Dave
that was
says,
the most terrifying request ever. I've never felt like more of a proper imposter. For one being asked and then saying yes. I was like, what am I doing? I'm not. These guys, like the system dynamicist. You've got Steve Keen. This is crazy. I'm not doing this. But you did talk me into it.
So we get you. We decide we're going to sit down. We're going to use some of your expertise on graphics and an intro. So we did. I think this would be version 4 of the show, and we got you to do the intro and stuff. And it was a good little collab.
I'm the best imposter. Thank you.
it taught me a lot about just kind of presenting a good, strong intro. And for a lot of people that complain in the comments, this is a live stream. So we, instead of just having a quiet countdown for 3 minutes, we decided to put in a big grand intro. That's why we're doing it. So a lot of people watch the show after. I see it in the comments all the time. Oh, why the big long intro? Because that's not a big thing in YouTube videos. But for live streams, that's our countdown. So if you're listening to me right now and you're watching this later, that's why we're doing this. This is a live stream. It's getting people to roll into the stream so we have a good audience when we actually do go live. So we do that. We come up with some new thumbnails and stuff, and the show grows even more. We take the summer off. I decide, you know what? I need to nail down the thumbnails. You see the recurring theme here. And so we now have gone to a new set of thumbnails that has put our views up even more. I'll bring up the chart. I was playing around with Ravel. That is our show from November 2022 to now. And Steve might cringe a little bit. I'm using some linear regression here. But we've had solid growth really since we did that first update to the thumbnail nails and titles in September 2023. So I've often
this could map onto a Bitcoin chart as well. I think so. There's a lot of correlation there. Is it causation? That's the thing. Anyway, so yeah, so these things make big differences.
Yeah, it does. It's really like if any aspiring YouTubers out there, it doesn't matter what content you have. At the end of the day, you've got to get that hook in first, or nobody's going to watch it to start with, right? And so through all those first 30, 40 episodes, we had really great content in the conversations we had. It didn't hook anybody through that initial thumbnail and title. So that's unfortunate, but we do hook them now. Everybody gets to see Steve all the time, and it's that's kind of, you know, I've often wondered, you know what, should I do this? Because it takes about 2 hours a week to set up each show, like on average. I've often wondered, you know, is it even worth doing this anymore? But, you know, when I look at the growth, it's like, if that growth continues, right, where, you know, right now between Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, we get about 10,000 views a week. You know, it would be nice to get to around 100,000 a week, right? And then we all have the ability to kind of leverage that platform for our own personal work. So we just keep going.
But also with this, and this is what always attracted me to your show, is the fact that what's getting talked about is super complex, nuanced, and the people that are engaged with it want to talk about it at a non-partisan. There's no avoiding politics in economics, obviously, but you guys want to interrogate without fear or favor a lot of the ideas that are swimming around out there. And I just thought, I really admire that. So so that's why I'm doing this. Is why I'm still here. It's a labor of love. So for me, that's why I'd like to see it grow, because we need more of that space. The shouty stuff is dangerous. We get too much of it. We need places where people are talking about the detail and the nuance of all of these things, because they are complex. And thinking that they're not complex is crazy. I mean, personally, I try to simplify it, obviously, to explain it as much as possible. That's kind of my role. But you guys are the maestros who were understanding the complexity of these things. So should we get the rest of the team on and get into it, or did you want to? Because I think then we'll start having a look at 2024. And then I noticed in the comments someone was asking, "Come on, what about 2025? What do you guys think?" So I don't doubt that we will get there as well, won't we? But let's bring on the rest of the team and let's have a look at 2024. Here he is. Here's Steve, and there's Mike. And do we have a Dan? There he is. Yep. The whole crew. It's kind of funny having a whole screen full of faces like this, all these familiar faces.
All male, unfortunately. That's our fate.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Now, what are we gonna? We're gonna tackle 2024, because I don't know exactly a way into this, but there's the haves and the have-nots when it comes to 2024. It seems the arguments that it was a good economy. I suppose we're generally talking about the US because it drives the economic sort of narrative everywhere else. But you know, generally speaking, was do we have a good economy? And if so, who for? And if it wasn't, then how did that narrative get cut through? I think that's the sort of thing that's in the back of my mind when I think of 2024.
I think it's a great year of contrast, and 2025 is likely to be more extreme again, because what you have in the USA, and I don't know whether this is deliberate policy from the Biden administration or just the momentum on from COVID, but they've been running quite substantial deficits for the whole period. They've also had high interest rates. And that's, and then you've got two independent groups for that. We can definitely blame the high interest rates on Powell and the Federal Reserve Board. But the America's deficits, were they deliberate? Were they flown from COVID? I really don't know the politics of that. But if you look at it, the American economy has been booming. Okay. And you had rising inflation for a while. People are saying, oh, you know, watch, it's going to take off. Well, it's taken off. It's gone home. Taken its bat and ball and gone home. It's down to what, about 2% now, having hit 5% at one stage. So you have a booming American economy, and then you have Germany falling over quite badly. I remember seeing what was his name? Rudy Bachman, one of my favorite people. Hey, Rudy, saying how Germany could not suffer from the loss of access to Russian energy because energy is only 4% of GDP, and it therefore contributes 4% of the change in GDP. So if you lose 10% of energy, you'll get a 0.4% fall in GDP, and now Germany is plunging. And you've got basically so many, for a while, some contrasting schemes. And Mealy's turned up as well. I think we've got to talk about him in Argentina and the crazy situation there. So it's a year of extreme contrasts. Normally what you get is not that it's harmony by any means, but everything tends to move in the same direction in different economies because of the scale of global financial flows and global policy movements as well. But this time around, we've got, America was relatively booming, and that didn't help Biden or Harris in the election. High inflation, which was a factor behind, a lot of people argue, a factor behind why they lost. Slumping economy, the UK has gone negative pretty much, for a flatlining or going backwards, while they're supposedly trying to grow. Europe is looking so bad that the Germans are even discussing removing their debt brake. So yeah, it's interesting year of contrast. Not to forget China. So
yeah. So China, what's your shorthand for understanding China in the same way?
Again, everybody's expecting China to fall over, but China's been they're going to hit them with tariffs. That'll make them fall over. How did they fall over? They landed on their own capacity to manufacture. I don't know what the scale is these days. I've lost touch with chip scales, but I think it's sub-micron scale chips were supposed to only be able to be made by ASML, which is the Dutch company that manufactures the high precision, high ultraviolet lithographic machines that enable you to cut sub-micron channels, where all China has is something that operates, I think it's 5 nanometer versus 0.7, something of that scale difference. And then just 2 weeks ago, I think it was, or even last week, Huawei released its latest phone with sub-micron chips. It's worked out a way to use the old technology, which is, and ASML's got a more advanced version, to be able to produce the same scale chips as ASML. So all the attempts to suppress China, everything, so we've got China, hit them with tariffs, don't let them have foreign devices. They just keep on growing and keep on industrializing, rather. So that seems to be the theme of this year. And with Huawei coming out, how do you pronounce it? Huawei, I think it is, coming out with a new phone and a whole bevy of chips. And you're also seeing, I think that this is the year when you started to see the American dominance of electric vehicles, i.e. Elon Musk, starting to lose out to BVD. So China's progress continues, and I still think it will taper. It has to, the logistic type logic has to taper at some, but it's still growing despite all the naysaying about how they're going to shoot it down. And I think there's a fair bit to learn from all as to why that's been happening, which we can talk about about today.
Yeah, it's quite a nuanced year. Some sectors of people are definitely had the best year of their lives, and Other people have not had the best, year of their lives. It looks like Dave's gone. That's okay. I'm here. I can host. So China, you know what? We kind of, in the media, because they have a slower growth right now. There's this, talk that it's the end of this, dominant run with China. But really, they're still at 3% GDP growth. That's phenomenal, right? And they're not going away anytime soon. So the one thing, because I like macroeconomics, their capital output ratio is dropping right now. And so is that a question of malinvestment? So is China invested in so much over the last 30 years that there's really not a lot left to invest? So obviously the output from what they're investing in is going down. There is a story there, but still they're huge. They have such a capacity to leverage at any time. Taxing, Trump taxing his own firms as tariffs isn't going to hurt China when Americans need Chinese products anyways, and they're going to continue to buy them. That's why I tell my fellow Canadians, don't worry about, Trump's 25% tariffs, right? They need our lumber. They're not going to get it from anywhere else. And if anything, if we want to fight a trade war, instead of counteracting with tariffs of our own, which is just a tax on our importers, we should just force the prices up on the goods that we're exporting to the U.S. So not only will their firms have to pay a 25% tax that Trump implements, they'll actually have to pay 25% on the price as well. And that'll really do them in. That would be a good trade war. But unfortunately, the mainstream narrative really arises here. And this is going to be right now the stories with Mexico and Canada, because this is where Trump has targeted these tariffs. First and foremost is going to hurt the American importers long before it hurts, Mexico. Let's face Americans buy washers and dryers at a phenomenal rate. If you look at the numbers, they get them all from Mexico, and that's not going to change. Than consumers are going to have to pay more money for them in the U.S.
Which companies produce them in Mexico? The Mexican companies or American companies relocated there for cheap labor?
Yeah, so like LG is down. I don't know if LG is a big one for Washington.
LG is Korean. Okay,
it's Korean. So Whirlwind, Mike, you would know the names here. You've got
Whirlpool.
Well, they traditionally were all made in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and the facilities there just slapped different labels, Whirlpool, LG, whatever on the things. I know this because my son's wife's father, my co-father-in-law, or however that is, whatever he is to me, for many, many, many decades ran an appliance store. And so whenever we would need a washer, a dryer, refrigerator, whatever, I'd call him up and say, Ray, I need a refrigerator, whatever. And he had all the inside information. And with washers and dryers, he would say, they're all junk. He goes, they don't make them like they used to. That's why Americans buy so many, because they break after 3 years. He said, except there's one manufacturer he'll put his name behind, which is what we bought and all his kids bought. Do I know what it is?
Yes.
Speed Queen. And those are the ones they put into laundromats.
Commercial laundromats. I know. I've seen the name there. Yeah. Obviously, because much I travel, but yeah, I've seen them. Okay.
Yeah, Ray called them cement mixers that they can take a beating and they keep going. So we got Speed Queens. He says refrigerators, they're all junk. Stoves are all junk. He goes, pick whatever you want. They all suck. They all break. They're made to crap out after a couple of 3 years. You can't get replacement parts, and they don't train anybody to fix them anyway.
Designed obsolescence.
This is the old built-in obsolescence argument. Is that still? How many years ago are you talking here, Mike? What sort of?
Oh, I talk to Ray all the time.
That's still the case. So is it still built-in obsolescence and? Yeah, because let's go. See, this is Christmas time. Let's throw some stupid personal anecdotes in. My first wife was a obsessive filler of space. So my turntable had books on top of it because you could put books on top of the cover. Okay, play the turntable, take the books off. I've stopped using the turntable. She did the same thing with the washing machine. I had a Hoover, which is an Australian brand, and she filled it to capacity. And I said, you could hear the damn thing, ba-boom, ba-boom. It's making more noise than we were, and I said, like, you're going to break it. No, it'll have. Well, it broke, And I bought another one, and it broke. And I thought, "Fuck this! I've had enough of." This is 2 in the first 3 years of a marriage or less. And okay, I'm going to buy something which doesn't break. So I bought a Miele. Now I've got a feeling Miele is outside that cache because when we got the Miele installed, the thing span at 3,000 revs a minute. I mean, you actually hear it started to hum, like you're starting up a magnetic resonance machine, and she never managed to break that. So I think there are some variations there, but is it still like American goods, Japanese, Korean is saying the same about all of them?
So I'm glad you didn't get her a washing board and tell her to go down to the river and do the clothes.
Oh, very funny. But this is actually an interesting story in energy here because I've forgotten who it was, but we're talking on a show recently where somebody talked about selling electric machines, the very first electric motors when they came out. And there you could find ads in newspapers to sell electric motors, and nothing ever happened. And then somebody said, "We've got a washing machine. Why don't you buy?" And the washing machine sales accelerated because that's actually an electric motor doing something really useful. And I remember stories of my own mother who died about 4 years ago at the age of 94. And early in the marriage, she tells me, "Dad, my father came into the laundry one day to see her doing a hand wringer. So to get to dry clothes, she used to actually have and she was just so exhausted. I won't tell you how too many pregnancies. She practiced the Catholic method of birth control, Vatican roulette. Okay. Anyway,
Every
so
term is sacred.
Grinding away, and Dad saw her like in sheer exhaustion turning this, and he went out and bought a washing machine, which had, of course, an automatic wringer and so on, as well as the automatic tumbler. And Mum said Dad couldn't stop bringing friends over to see the machine. Now we take that for granted today. I mean, you do the washing. What does it mean? You chuck stuff on the washer, press a button, come back when it beeps at you, move it to the other machine, the dryer, press a button, come back when it beeps at you. That's the extent to which we've become reliant upon technology and energy. And that's why I think we're in such a precipice now, because the global warming issue was one of my main foci these days. The consequences of the energy that drives those machines is more important than the fact that they break down.
Well, that we don't make them to last because we're just wasting resources with the embodied energy.
We've made a society that's not made to last. That's the real issue. Okay, so if you have technological obsolescence, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah. Actually, on that, not quite on the climate change or energy use thing, but the washing machines themselves in the first place, the Hans Gosling presentation, he's the guy that did the Mind the Gap presentation. I don't know if you've come across them.
Minder, yeah.
Yeah, so Gapminder, sorry, not Mind the Gap. Yeah, it's showing what difference that made. Like it's on its own, probably the single greatest productivity booster in history. It's just astonishing what the washing machine did because it freed women and time to into the economy.
Yeah, and it was, if anything, ended sexism. It ended, but reduced it. I mean, sexism. People, I see the discussions about sexism these days. And I remember my father and mother, again, my parents' situation. When my father and mother met in the Commonwealth Bank, one of the conditions of being in the bank was if you get married, one of you has to leave. Okay. They wouldn't let married couples. Of course, it was 99% of the time the woman left. So, back, take care of the kids, all that sort of stuff. And the washing machine was the point that made that possible. It meant that inevitable task went from taking how many 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week down to an hour or two in trivial labor. So that's, as you say, it was probably the most important invention we made to reduce the tribal nature of our production systems, basically.
So has anybody answered the idea that, like, how did there be such a mismatch between the positivity on the macro level of the US economy 2024 and the sentiment? I've heard two versions of this, by the way, just to prime you. I mean, the version that seemed to me apparent straight away was the classic, as the economy's stupid and people did not feel, and this was my observation from going there, obviously very anecdotal, was that people weren't feeling it at all on the ground. They were just the people holding things together, and the top end was doing very well, which is what's measured. And then others have said, no, look, it is news media. It's successfully translated into telling people everything was crap. I don't know. I'm not torn so much because I really think people are struggling. What you see on the surface is people just getting by.
I think. Pardon me, but I'm being very verbose tonight, so you can kick me in the balls later, and I'll shut up. But what I think a large part that's going on here is this is the end of a long-term process, because you have, if you go back 50 or 60 years, the level of private debt was so low, and incomes were relatively so high that, as much as I'm knocking that period, my father on one income supported a family of 7 and bought a house and so on. That is just not possible today unless you're a family of 7 or your dad's called Elon. So the capacity to support a family was much greater in those days with lower incomes. Or rather, not lower, less incomes, one person working. Now 2 people have got to work. Dad was in the union, not that he's an unusual union man. The union bargained for you. Now you've got to bargain on your own. What do? You don't bargain. Okay, you put up with whatever you're being paid. Security of job was far greater in those days. 40-hour week. Yeah, okay, to work allegedly longer hours, but you got all the various employment benefits, health benefits, and so on. I'm talking the Australian situation, of course, but that was what I was used to. And you got a job as a first year outer, you got paid for whatever you're doing. Now they've got gig economy jobs where and 0-hour contracts, and in the insecurity, you've got to manage your own situation, including negotiating for your pay and so on, multiple jobs, etc., etc. There's such a degree of frustration. I think it's just come to head this year. I don't think it was actually anything was bad about the economy per se compared to previous years. Certainly in the American case, it's doing better than it was pre-COVID for sort of workers' wage levels, and the inflation occurred, yeah, but it was nothing like the level of the 70s. But I think it's just this: we're finally getting, after 40 years of neoliberal policies and the breakdown of supports for workers and their capacity to bargain and get a decent living, they're starting to vote. And they're voting, we don't like it. And basically, we don't like it. You're in charge. You haven't changed it. We don't like it. What's the other guy going to do? And we're getting this topsy-turvy changing. We can predict next year's election winner. It was last year's election loser.
Yeah, it's getting like that, isn't it? Daniel, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think a little bit more abstractly on this, and I think it's disappointing because I think that the relative health of the economy is still pegged to GDP. It's sad because, at least on this show, we've talked a lot about climate change and until we get behind that centric trajectory towards GDP, I think we're just being held as slaves, right? We put a little bit of pressure on. I'm not talking about austerity measures, whether they're like austerity measures that are handed down to us from policy, or whether they're austerity measures that just happen as a result naturally from the economy. It's like we don't have a fortitude or the temperance to absorb that.
Daniel, is it easy for you to pump up your volume?
Yeah, you're very, very mild. Yeah. Get closer to your microphone.
Yeah, give it to us on.
Have a relationship.
Cylinders.
Yeah. Have a relationship with. Is that better there, guys?
A little bit more.
Better.
If you can.
Yeah.
You're getting intimate here. We've got to
Yeah.
Imagine you're doing TikTok. Okay, start making love to your microphone.
Okay.
Is that what happens on TikTok?
Actually, Ghost in the Half Shell had a great comment a moment ago. Can you put a Ghost in the Half Shell's comment there? I think it's really important.
Sorry, I just want to. I want to, as Dan will fix his audio thing. I just want to highlight really what Steve was talking about. There's a lot of truth behind it. There's always been, at least for the last 40 years in the U.S. and most Western countries, an underlying frustration of the situation. But I think people like to suffer in silence. So if your neighbors aren't complaining about it, you feel like this is a you problem, and you don't want to say I'm suffering, like the economy is not good to me. However, when situations like this past bout of inflation comes up, the narrative comes up in the news, and it almost gives permission to the average person to say, you know what, yeah, I am struggling. And it's this positive reinforcement loop where, yeah, I'm struggling too, right? And eventually it gets to a point where it's actually overemphasized, right? And what I've looked at, I was looking at a chart comparing this to election cycles, and there's a loose correlation when inflation, so when the general prices are rising faster than wages are growing, you see a shift in politics. You saw it in 2008 with Bush. Now, you could say there's a lot of other issues where the Republicans lost, and it went to the Democrats at that point. But before the GFC, inflation was higher for 8 months than wage growth, right? We saw in 2012, it was higher, I think, for about 9 months. And I almost postulate during that time, as prices were growing faster than wages, that was the seeds of Donald Trump's election in 2016. And then, of course, we saw for almost 18 months, prices were growing faster than wages after the pandemic. And you could say that kind of sowed the seeds for Biden and the Democrats, right? So I see it gets really extreme, and not when prices are, there's elevated inflation, but there's elevated inflation and decreased wage growth. That's when that sentiment comes out. The media starts amplifying it. People that are struggling in the economy can finally come out and say, yeah, I'm struggling. This is hurting me. And they don't feel like they're alone. They know their neighbors are struggling too. So it's that there's a positive feedback loop in that sentiment. So, but like Steve was saying, I agree. Under the underlying issue has existed, the neoliberal order has existed for 40 years. People have been struggling since then. The wage share has been going down for 40 to 50 years, right? So the underlying problems there, it gets amplified when the media jumps on and there's a sensational story like inflation going up.
Yeah, but it is the case, people being squeezed for that length of time. That there's just sheer frustration, and house prices are a major part of that as well, and also rents. I mean, the rise in house prices is a global phenomenon. Again, it's driven by deregulating banks and let them lend as much as they like for housing. That's the fundamental cause. And actually, some very nice work by Blair Fix on that point just recently, showing that if you had the same income distribution that existed back in the 70s, then housing would be affordable. Okay, it's not an absence of housing. It's an absence of housing people can afford. But if you had the income distribution that applied in the 70s, houses would be the median price of housing would now be quite affordable. It wouldn't be completely out of reach. So it's income distribution as well as everything else. But what you're seeing is people saying, I'm working my guts off. I don't have any security. I don't have I've got no health, in particular in America, no health cover. Working at 2 or 3 jobs, can barely pay the rent, and that's becoming problematic as well. The private equity is diving in, as well as Ghost says here. So you're finding yourself, being turned into like a peasant without the security that a peasant had. And I think that's a large part of why the extra part of the electorate is so volatile. And then anybody who comes in, whatever they promise at the election, they don't deliver on. Obama being, I think, the absolute classic on that front. So the level of disillusionment people have with politics as well is turning up in that political instability, and they're suffering, and they're saying nobody's taking on the finance sector, which is the most important thing to turn those particular challenges around.
Well, all these distractions are almost designed to stop you talking about the things that.
Drago's comment up here, by the way, just after that one.
Daniel, we've got your sound up a bit. You sorry to have cut you off there, really, but we didn't quite finish hearing about. Hearing about you on that idea that we may be fixated perhaps on measuring these things wrong, especially with GDP, which I still don't understand why we've got GDP, to be honest. But anyway, sorry, do you want to pick up on that thought?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it in a show. I mean, probably in several shows, but I think first principles, it goes back to viewing things through the lens of climate and the catastrophe that's forthcoming. And when you look at it through that lens, and you realize that the feedback that we get on the strength of the economy, which is reported in GDP primarily, the feedback is I don't know if you guys would say instantaneous, but it kind of runs month to month, and it really doesn't span outside of an election cycle, and it becomes an issue, and it's terribly inefficient. one question I have for Steve about the housing, I kind of get what you're saying about the housing, right? And we need to make it more affordable. Okay, I get that. It's not just a function of supply and demand. I think that's part of what you're saying. But
Yeah.
what I'm curious about is I'm interested in really interesting shocks to the system, a what if scenario. So if you could flick the switch and dramatically increase the income for individuals, therefore making housing more affordable, would that just skyrocket inflation? Like, I'm just curious.
I wouldn't do it that way, Dan. My approach has always been what I call a modern debt jubilee. Use the government's money creation capacity to cancel private debt, and then stop letting banks lend as much as they do for housing. So I had an idea I called the PIL, which stands for Property Income Limited Leverage. It's just, Mike, I find nobody gets jokes about the PIL anymore. I wonder why that is. Yeah.
Showing your age, definitely. I mean,
Okay.
I know, but
Yeah, it was
By the way,
like 40 years ago.
The pill was invented in Worcester, Mass, and I used to work with a guy who was one of the scientists on it.
Oh, they got every time you've got a decent anecdote, mate. Over to you, anecdote time. Come
also,
on.
the pill was
Come on, I want to
invented
hear the story.
by
I want to hear the
What's the
story.
anecdote show?
Mike.
Yeah, Mike.
So, well, pivoting off the pill, I think the economy for the last 4 years is not surprisingly recovering from a tremendous shock, COVID, pandemic, and not surprisingly, with all the supply chain disruptions, et cetera, we had a lot of inflation, and we had a lot of rising interest rates. Okay, and so nothing shocking there. That is exactly what you would expect to happen, and of course, it has been recovering and going the other way since the peak of the shock. But there's delays in the system, so politically, your time in office might not coincide with the economic dynamics. So I think the election is really the key. The election was, I think, a function of inflation, particularly food prices, because everybody is influenced by food prices because everybody buys food, whether you're going to a restaurant or the grocery store. And people were just furious at how their paychecks didn't go as far, and they could feel it virtually daily. So I think that pissed off a lot of people. And then you got into the cultural stuff in the United States anyway. The immigration thing, all the woke stuff that pissed off a lot of people. The Bud Light situation, for example, showed that it's not a trivial issue for a lot of people. And that's why the Biden administration lost, and then he's cognitively challenged, and Harris wasn't terribly effective as a speaker and whatever. So all that combined to bring in a new administration. Now, if you look at the various predictors of recession, the Michelet and Sayers index is still in possible recession. The yield curve had inverted. It's out of inversion now, but usually a recession comes after it inverts. I do think there has to be a catalyst of some sort for a recession. And in a similar vein, the stock market's been booming, but these things, they don't go up in a straight line. They go up and down, like so. So there's going to be a blow off at some point. I think you need a catalyst. Now, whether the catalyst is a war or something like that, or more likely, President-elect Trump's campaign promises, tariffs, right? Deportation of illegal immigrants, and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's DOGE, Government Efficiency Committee. So all of those stated goals, if they're all implemented, are going to be very contracting for the economy, right? Low-wage immigrant workers are going to be deported. They're going to be cutting lots of government programs, and they're going to be slapping tariffs left, right, and up and down. Now, final point is that's the political rhetoric and whatever. Real world, I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as it sounds on paper for a variety of reasons. take for example tariffs. If you read Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, he tells you how he does things. He makes an extreme opening statement and plants a flag, knowing full well he's not going to get there, and he doesn't even necessarily want to be there. But then he gives in, and he's seen as giving in to where he really wants to be. So I think he just uses a rhetorical device to try for negotiation purposes. Right. Number one. I think on the immigration, the deportation, and all that, realistically, in 4 years, you are not going to find everybody. So I think what they're going to do is they will seal the border, and they will go after the criminal elements. And I think that'll consume 4 years. So, the mother and her 3 children who are in a shelter somewhere, I doubt they have anything to worry about realistically. And so now, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's Doge committee, where they're going to start cutting stuff, I can't imagine there won't be pushback on whatever they're going to propose to do. I don't know how effective they will be or not be. Both those guys seem to get stuff done. Even if, again, I just am thinking of Elon Musk's rocket that the thing grabbed, and it's like.
Did you watch that live, Mike? Did you watch that live?
No, just the clips on it. But I was like, holy crap, that's like, wow,
I was watching that live. I mean, that's like I've got the same admiration for the end. Whether he does it or not, I don't give a fuck whether he builds those things. It's the fact that his companies do it. So there's something about the environment he sets up that means really imaginative engineering gets attempted, and it's to see it.
Guys get stuff
he gives
done
a fuck
not.
whether it's Yeah.
I don't have a good feel for that yet. They very well may. I don't know. But all of these things are going to be contractionary, at least in the short run, for the economy. And that might be the catalyst.
Well, that's actually what I'm working on. I'm working on a book for that reason, because Herald of Change, I'll put a comment in the comments itself, but my debt jubilee, I call a modern debt jubilee, specifically directed that issue. What about people who didn't get in kind of the speculative bubble? And the idea was everybody gets the same amount of money, period, per capita. You get as much as Elon Musk, and you would get the same amount of money. And it would be something that would be sufficient to pay off household debt, which is what old jubilees used to do. The jubilees didn't abolish business debt. They left them standing. They abolished household debts. So basically, that's like about 100% of GDP. Everybody gets a fraction of 100% of GDP. You get your proportional share. That's something of the order of $100,000 per American, roughly speaking. And then if you don't have a debt, if you have debt, you've got to pay it off. If you don't have debt, then that's money sitting in your bank account. There could have been controls to stop that leading to an inflationary surge. You could be required, for example, to buy government bonds instead, which would be giving you a 5% return on that. But the idea was to just simply eliminate household debt without bankrupting the banks and without favoring people who'd speculated of those who didn't speculate. So it's feasible. It'll never fucking happen.
Yeah, it never happened. But I mean, can we speculate how you could make it happen? Like, what would happen?
I've done a mathematical model of it, and it ends up boosting GDP. But actually, like with this GDP point that Dave raised a while ago as well, and whether it's been raised a few times here, and all the politicians talk about GDP is doing really well, 3.4% growth last year, yada yada yada, and it gets criticized from two extremes. One extreme says, well, GDP, if you had a car accident, that adds to GDP because the tow truck has to tow them away and somebody buys a new car, and that's a negative for it. On the other, but I think the negatives are otherwise. First of all, what GDP tells you fundamentally is how much energy we've used. Yeah. And that front, a car accident and dragging a car away uses energy. So it's a very strong relationship with our energy consumption. But secondly, it doesn't matter to GDP if you can't afford to buy a house. And that's what's become a major dilemma for so many people. And I'm going to push my luck and do a screen share here, seeing whether my speed of my system is fast enough. But this is a document I put together, a chart from a document I put together for the New Liberals in Australia when I was ran for Parliament unsuccessfully. And that the red line is people who own their houses outright. The black line is people who are tenants. And the blue line is people who have got to own a house but have a mortgage on it. Now, the intent of government policy was to drive the red line up. Well, whoopee-doo, wasn't that a raging success? So what you've had is just inflating a bubble, which means less and less people can own a house. More of those who own a house are in debt, and lots of people can't afford to buy a house in the first place, so they're paying private tenancy. So all the news about GDP doesn't matter when you're being squeezed by things that aren't measured by GDP, which fundamentally come down to property ownership.
And even Kuznets thought it'd be crazy to use it after the war. I mean, it was there to measure productivity in the war, right? So, and he was like, well, you don't use it beyond that because that'd be crazy. I think he even gave examples, like it wasn't quite this example, but it was like, you could measure the productivity of making lots and lots of cigarettes. That doesn't mean that it's good for society. So he had a pretty firm
but it's
view
become a holy cow in Western civilization, rising GDP. And that holy cow was, that's what's going to turn us into steaks, okay? Because we are going to be, by putting the pressure on rising GDP each year, what it means is don't worry about the distribution of income. We're going to increase everybody's income, so even the poor are going to be rich, compared to themselves now in 30 years' time. Well, the days of that are over. And the thing is, it's going to come too late for the large generation of young voters right now who living in gig economy jobs, not seeing the benefit because income distribution has been pushed against them, and they can't afford to get into housing, and they have to rent in really uncomfortable situations. And I just saw an article in my local Australian newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald, by a guy, I think he's doing a master's thesis on the issue. So I think it was something published in The Conversation, first of all. But he said that he's finding people living up to 20 people in a 2-bedroom apartment, sharing bedrooms, hot bedding. Okay, now it had hot desking for some time. Now these people are copying hot bedding. You wonder why they're annoyed about the state of politics.
Yeah, and look, that's how I started in London. That's a typical Kiwi thing. Like 5 of us in a flat in a place that only had 2 bedrooms. So like you graduated to a bedroom over a couple of years. It was ridiculous. But so that's not impossible. But you do that for a few years. You're doing that when you're 35 or something like that. You're going to start feeling that the system is rigged against you, and that's that's the attitude people have got. And there's the classic in capitalism combined with one person and one vote is a recipe for explosion. That's what we're seeing now, because the wealth has gone. The people who make the money at the top of the system are doing very well, thanks very much. And because they vote one vote per dollar. It's the electoral campaigns and stuff like that. The Democrats, so as you said in a previous show, decided to cozy up to the finance sector. That was particularly under Clinton, but also under Obama. Well, there's lots of money in the finance sector, but there aren't many votes. And now we're seeing it's distant. That's $1 one vote.
Basically. $1 one vote works for the rich, doesn't work for the poor. The poor get one vote. Even if there's something as ridiculous as the American electoral system, that flows through. So you've now got a majority of Americans, like 50.3%, I thought, were the figure of those who voted for Trump, showing we're pissed off.
Yeah. Ty, have we got a top chatters list this week?
We do. We should get Dan to read it. It's been a while.
I knew you were going to do that.
Sorry, Dan. Yeah, you made a mistake. You turned up.
Sean Demratowski, Economics in One Lesson. Michael D'Souza Cruz, Tony Wilson, Paul Traynor, Bachelor of Science, Murphy Pluckme, Mariek Ropal, God in the Details, Victor, Ghost on the Half Shell, Web Freaks, Algorithm, Kip, James McInnes, Stephen Hinton, The Herald of Change, Entropy Juggler, Against the State, Andrew Sullivan, D. Smith, Dadson Worldwide, Eddie Chu, UBI Economics, Michael Griffith, No One, Jeff Little, Nick Thiel, Abdiolu Alio, Ronald Vormwald, Downshift, Brady Nields, Marie Danell, Michael Newman, Kevin Toohey, Jay Mills, Ian Perriella, Serenity, Tedia, Darren Lawson, Hosking, D. Bruce, Chandra Welsh, Circuli Economis, HPB, and Bob Liori.
Hey. There's some new names.
Yeah, I was timing. Somebody was
a few
gentle to me on
flips
that.
there. Yeah, a few
list.
flips.
I was hoping. I thought it was going to be that end part, right?
It wasn't very serene.
No, it was.
It was more serene than serene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ty, if we talked with you about this this opening issue, we gave us a big roundup. I did lose signal for a sec there, so I disappeared. So you might have actually tackled this, but this idea of, well, before we leave it, I guess the state of the election based on, was it a case of inflation wrecking everybody's dreams and hopes of a future, or was it media? What was the story for you? I mean, and tell me if you've already talked about this, because I did lose you guys for a bit.
No, I didn't talk about it. For me, this Mike kind of hit on some of the points, like from the Democratic side, their own mistakes. Unfortunately, Biden was kind of at the end of his cognitive chain in life to be a president. Not to say that he's not a smart guy. I think his communication skills started suffering there, and his physical appearance and behavior was definitely to a detriment. And Harris just didn't have that captivating aura to her. I think she would have made a great president. I thought she was a smart person. Her credentials seem pretty strong. I don't know her as like personally, but she seemed like she'd make a sound president, but she just didn't have that charisma. And then on the flip side, whether you love him or hate him, Trump is very entertaining, and entertainment can be confused with charisma to voters, right? So he had that charisma entertaining factor, but then there's the other parts, the exogenous parts to that were apart from the two candidates, and that was the story of inflation. And then the part of that was the amplification of it by certain media outlets that we were in an inflationary period, and why we were in that inflationary period. That's a big part of it too. And summing all those parts together, you have a perfect storm of bringing in a new party. And I want to highlight too, Steve hit something, the kind of the nail on the head. I think we're in a period now where things are going to be at an extreme when it comes to the average person navigating the economy, where we're going to see a flip-flop, especially in the US, between their two-party system, where we're just going back and forth. So traditionally, if you look at like the history, right, we have two-term presidents, and it's very rare. You know, the one before Trump was Bush Senior only having one term, right? But generally, we see two-term presidents. The second term, you can see kind of a degrade in their popularity. And then we switch to the next party. I think we might be in a period where we see single-term presidents, right? Because we're in such a extreme situation for the average person. They're struggling, right? It may not be it, though, that's always in the news. So for the next 2 years, the media might not be so aggressive on the narrative of struggle, right? And so it won't be there, but it's still happening. People are still struggling. And I want to go back to where I made a statement that things are better, or I may have made it sound like things are better if prices are rising slower than wages. It still doesn't mean things are better for the average person, but I do see that as an inflection point when we get those higher than normal inflation and lower wages. Those are big inflection points for the economy, and that's when the media starts really amplifying that narrative.
I think it's a trend as well. Yeah, sorry, Mike, you go. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, people don't understand when inflation has gone way down, prices are still going up, just at a slower rate. So if prices have gone way up and now they're still going up, but at a slower rate, they're still high. And if your wages have not kept up from a debt jubilee or for universal income program or whatever, people have lost ground and they're not going to get that ground back, and they're going to be quite
a large part of it comes from the strength of the finance sector and the amount of money people have had to borrow to get into housing, and therefore, I mean, this is a personal bee in the bonnet for me because I've been campaigning about this for something like 30 years now. But a major point of it is the amount of leverage that governments allow people to have to buy housing. And as it happens, the current Prime Minister of Australia is a graduate of the Department of Political Economy at Sydney University that I caused largely. I'm not the only one, obviously. There was a mass movement I was part of, but I played a pivotal role in that movement to bring about that department being created. And Anthony Albanese has just tweeted a couple of days ago, isn't it great? We've now reduced the amount of deposit you need to buy a house to 2%. That means, in other words, we've allowed leverage on houses to reach 50 to 1. Okay? Now, and I couldn't help myself. I said, I can't believe that you're a graduate of the Department of Political Economy that I helped bring about.
Do the Aussies call that the gearing ratio?
That's what I'm using here as the gearing ratio, because if you look at, and this is again one reason this trend has been allowed to happen, is because you allow banks to lend for housing. The amount of money they create the money, so you've got extra monetary demand in the economy. That drives up the house price, which then feeds back in demand for housing. So you get I hate calling it a positive feedback loop, Mike, because you and I and Ty know what that means. But what it actually means is an amplifying of the feedback. So you have a plus leads to a plus in the opposite direction. More mortgage debt leads to more demand for housing, which leads to more mortgage debt. So it's an amplifying feedback. If you go back to the 60s, yeah.
Is there any, in your mind, is there any solution on the supply side to get more homes built?
No. See, yes, there is a solution on the supply side. If you're a politician, you can wring your hands and say, it's because there's not enough supply of housing, and we're going to try to boost supply of housing now, and that's the responsibility of local government, so I hand it over to them. Because it means that they don't even ever have to do anything. If it's a supply issue, why don't you make some fucking public houses, which is what used to happen in the UK. Now, when Maggie Thatcher cut that out, what then happened was the supply of public housing dropped, and there was no change in the supply of private housing per capita. So the supposed private sector taking over didn't happen. Why? Because it wasn't profitable.
It's verboten to talk about as well.
Some people down the bottom of the scale, you can't expect them to be able to save enough money to buy a house or pay off a bit. Public housing works. Okay, so you take it away, and then you have people who would otherwise be not owning a house but still housed, and not owning a house and unhoused. And that's where a huge part of this sentiment that's causing so much political volatility is coming from today, because they are now being close to being the majority of the population.
It's even more leveraged in New Zealand, where I'm from. Growing up there, the
with
stress
Australian
on
banks,
my parents was insane. I mean, it's crazy.
Sorry, I talked over you. Sorry.
The pressure on my parents growing up, I remember. It destroyed my dad, because the interest on this huge. They were encouraged to leverage themselves to do, because this is the only way you're supposed to. This is the way you're supposed to fund your pension eventually. Is to leapfrog each other with higher and higher house prices. Even though you've got to sell out of that house and buy into the inflated market anyway, it makes no difference. So they bought into the con that was the answer. And when, of course, interest rates went up to 13% or something in the 80s, it nearly destroyed them. And they weren't alone. So it's crazy. And economically, what that does, or so psychologically, what that does to people, is it puts them in, the frighteners on, and they shut down. They don't do anything innovative anymore. All they're doing is whatever you tell them to do. That's just useless to an economy. So that's what bothers me about it at the psychological level. But actually, slight sidetrack, Steve. There was a comment there by Philip Brule. I've lost it now. He mentioned he talked. It was new here, and I thought it might be a nice one to pick up on, because he was new and he was asking if we were basically against capitalism generally, want to change it, or are we tweaking with it? And I thought it was maybe for others that are also listening, is like, what sort of things do we tend to talk about on this channel for anybody that was new? So I don't know if it's easy to find in the background there. There it is.
So I'll go ahead, Steve.
Mike, take it away, Mike.
Well, I can throw something on the table that I find a little interesting to think through, and that is one of the proposals that Trump has offered, but hasn't really been in the media a lot is the creation of new cities. Now in the UK, I think Milton Keynes was an example of a brand new city, and in Brazil, the capital, Brasilia, I think was so you start from scratch. And you say, we got a big chunk of land here, and pick a place, Iowa or Wyoming or Montana or someplace. And we're going to start from scratch and rethink what a good city should look like. And there should be a lot of starter homes that are affordable. There should be green energy, good school, and whatever. And people would move there, and the power company would be cooperatively owned, so everybody would benefit for it and what have you. So I'm not an urban planner, but in terms of, instead of trying to re-engineer existing cities, housing policies or whatever, maybe we should just start from scratch in at least countries like the US, where we have a lot of open space.
Good idea.
Yeah, I think in the general sentiment, I think what we're the actual underlying sentiment is that the analysis everybody uses of capitalism is wrong. Okay, mainstream analysis, neoclassical economics, that's garbage, and it has been garbage for 100 years in terms of knowing that there are intellectual flaws in how it attempts to model a market economy. And the trouble is that it gives a description of the economy which makes it look like it's a perfect anarchist system. Okay, if you look at neoclassical theory, it says, first of all, it reaches equilibrium, and that's really good. It's fantastic being in equilibrium. It's so exciting. Sorry, I froze. I was in equilibrium. It's so exciting being.
Nice in-joke. Literally no one got that.
Okay. Dynamics is much more fun, guys. Okay, so that's it's equilibrium. That's really good. Okay, only an economist can find equilibrium exciting. Secondly, it's a meritocracy. You get paid what they call your marginal product, and that therefore means you receive as income what you contribute to society, which makes it become a meritocracy. And then thirdly, it's an anarchist system because the market does everything. The market's anonymous. There's no power. Okay, we're all workers, independently competitive workers, bargaining against each other with independently working corporations, no unions, no monopolies. That's the ideal world. It's a utopia. Okay. Now, that's the vision that people are trying to analyze the real system with. And it's completely wrong. Mathematically, we can show most of that as intellectually fallacious. So we're saying, let's get a realistic analysis of capitalism before we start saying whether we should reform it or replace it or make the alternative. So the main focus in this channel is realism. And then with that realism, you get things which are both positive and negative about capitalism. If I want to point my main positive for capitalism, it's probably the second most successful social system ever for causing innovation. The most successful being Cro-Magnon tribal societies, which is where we built everything that we used to now, began there, language being obviously one of the most important. But that was the most innovative of societies because you were rewarded in your tribe, in a sense, for what you contributed, which was both necessary, but also what was new. So innovation, that was when splints became, the basis of our technology. Innovation was king. Capitalism is the second best society to that ever. Okay, so that's its positive. Its negative is the distribution of income and the dominance of the finance sector, but also, and this is crucially important, the use of energy and the creation of waste, and that's destroying the global capacity for the ecosystem will destroy the social system in revenge for what the social system is doing to the ecosystem. So those are the issues. Okay, that's our overall framing. But definitely what we're in for first and foremost is realism.
Yeah, I think Steve is spot on. I think command economies have where the state runs everything or more or less everything, has the problem of you got to clear the market somehow, right? So you either do it with price or with queues. With you have to wait, delays. So and black markets spring up. So you can have your free hip replacement, but 10 months from now, or if you have some money, you can go to the black market on a weekend and a doctor moonlighting will do it for you. So if capitalism is the second best system ever, Steve is right. We have to model it realistically, not with these fantasy neoclassical models. And then curb its excesses, right? So where things get out of control, whether it's income distribution or environmental damage and what have you, these factors are not taken into account. Power relationships are not taken into account in traditional economics. And I gotta say, why not to this day baffles me.
Yeah, it's
like,
because it's a utopia, mate. And this is, I mean, I've experienced this quite strongly because when I was a first year university student, I still believed all the neoclassical shit, and then I had it intellectually undermined for me by being exposed to the theory of the second best, which showed that if you had, I think the example that in my lecture used was you have both unions and employer associations bargaining over the wage. You don't get the equilibrium outcome. The neoclassicals want to get it where it's, isolated workers and isolated firms, and it's a free market for labor, and that'll give you the best possible social system. But what if you start with both unions and employer associations, and you abolish one but not the other? Provably, you reduce social welfare. And when I saw that, I thought there's something seriously wrong with this analysis here. So I started looking for alternatives, but at the same time, I had friends who were anarchists. So I was reading all the anarchist writers in the 19th century, Bakunin, Kropotkin, and so on and so forth. And what I realized at that stage of reading, that the anarchists were talking about precisely the same thing that neoclassicals saw as being in capitalism. You didn't have concentration of power. It was a utopia. So the neoclassical vision, it was a utopia. And that's why they hang on to it, despite the ludicrous intellectual failures of that model.
Well, physicists, neoclassical economists are often criticized as having physics envy. We want to be social scientists like physicists are, discovering the laws of the economic universe and what have you. But physicists will start with kind of the neoclassical model. They'll say, assume a frictionless surface, or assume a perfect vacuum. But they don't stop there. Economists stop there.
That's right.
So it's okay to have the one end of the spectrum, say in a perfect world or whatever, a frictionless surface, the neoclassical model, here it is. But now let's relax all that stuff and get to the real world. And that's where economists.
And they bullshit students to say we're going to relax those assumptions in future. And they don't. They make even more absurd assumptions.
Yeah.
So because they're logical flaws.
The math gets more difficult because they're making the same results more general.
But they've got to freeze various things. So, like, for example, this is what most people wouldn't realize this, but to explain why a market demand curve slopes down, you have to assume there's a benevolent dictator redistributing income and wealth before trade starts. Okay, that's the Sonnenschein and Mantel-de-Boer theorem. You can find that particular statement. I'll find the page. I think it's page 1076, something like that, in the Mas-Colell textbook. Okay, so neoclassical economics has ended up needing a benevolent dictator to explain why market demand curves slope downwards. That is one sick society, sick theory, and we're trying to get realism here, which is why we're fans of system dynamics.
And yet the utopia that they talk of, Steve, the one that you've hinted at, the utopia always seems to come with this not very utopian kind of baggage or way to get there, which it seems to be basically
they're describing a system which is nothing. They've got a model of the system which is nothing like the one in which we live. So, for example, an essential element of mainstream economics is that banks and debt and money don't matter. Let's model capitalism without the finance sector. Well, that's interesting. I'd like to live in that world, thank you, but I don't. So they make assumptions which leave out critical elements of the system that we live in, and then they give us lectures about how to run that system. The real world, where the elements they've assumed don't exist, are prominent.
Well, Steve, I know Dave Colander, fellow economist. He writes a lot of economics textbooks, though I think he's retired now.
Dave died a couple of years ago, mate. Do you know that?
Oh, no, I didn't. He passed? Oh, I didn't know that.
Maybe even this year. And he died about something. Anyway, the last 6 months to 2 years. I'll check while you're talking.
I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Dave was a good man.
Yeah. But But anyway, he would say there was a 15% rule because he was a big textbook writer. And that is, if you're going to be innovative with a textbook, you can only deviate from the standard story by 15% or less, or they won't publish your book.
Dave died in December 3, 2023, so just under a year ago.
I didn't know. Sorry.
Yeah. Dane, you'll take over. When Mike and I've been hogging here a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna Thanks for the prompt, Dave. I just I wanted to make it clear for listeners and myself. Steve, you'd mentioned something about the anarchism in the system of anarchy and also in capitalism. And so, could you describe what the so you're talking about some sort of centralized and managed power center structure. So, could you describe that as what's ideal in that?
Well, the neoclassical ideal is that the market solves all problems. Okay,
Right.
so what you have is traders turn up. They've got their goods they've been producing, or manna from heaven. Pardon me, can't help being facetious here. You have the market. Everybody comes to the market. They put their goods on the market. There's competitive bidding for the inputs, competitive bidding for the market as well. Everybody walks away with the goods that they're able to pay with their income, but their income reflects what they contributed to society. So the supply and demand curve, that fundamental vision of that's the unifying vision of neoclassical economics, and it comes from Marshall. It was in Marshall's principles that drawing first turned up, intersecting supply and demand curves. Now, the point of intersection is where you want to reach. That's equilibrium, and if the government does anything, it moves you away from that point. Therefore, government makes things worse. That's an automatic starting point of neoclassical theory. So if you look at the perfect neoclassical economic system, it's an anarchy. Anarchy means no government. So there's a critical way in which neoclassical theory argues for no government. And then this is where, this is what's turning up with Musk and Vivek's arguments about slashing the government down. And, they believe there's an automatic belief the government makes things worse. Now, it doesn't make these things make things perfect by any means, but the government's role in the dynamic system in which we live is critical in many ways, one of them being creating fiat money, okay, and another creating long-term assets which are not profitable for capitalists to make it with a short-term investment horizon. And then also regulating. You would have seen some complaints on Twitter about people being debanked. Have you seen that in the last couple of days?
No.
Okay. Some of the right wingers saying how we've been debanked. That's one of the real bad things about the current system. Find our bank accounts are closed. I've forgotten which is one of the commentators I quite like. Joe Rogan. Well, one of the people who put some of the people they were doing fraud. Okay, if you undertake what's defined as fraud, there are laws against it, and you'll breach them. And one of the ways you get the consequences of committing some form of fraud is your bank account gets shut down. So the point is that there are controls there to stop illicit behavior. And like even at the simplest level, when it comes to products, I'm looking around for something here to show off. So, but reliability. I want to avoid COVID. Okay? One of the things I wear is an electrostatic generator that I'm told uses negative ions to move that any particles get hit by it and moved out of my immediate airstream, which is one of the ways to reduce the likelihood of getting the disease. Now, why do I trust it? I sort of trust it, but partly I know it's been tested, had to go for the United States Drug and Food Administration to be approved for sale. If that goes, we're back in the snake oil days of the 19th century, the 1800s, where people would go from town to town selling their magic potion that cures all ills. And there are reasons we have regulations. I'll leave the guy coughing to make a comment on that one.
I think, Mike, I want to push back on Steve a bit after you're done, because go ahead, Mike. But
I think that the traditional neoclassical story is not anarchy in my view. It's rather that the role for the government is where it's a couple of ways to couch it. One is where the market fails with spillover costs and benefits, tragedy of the commons situations and what have you. The other is to think of it as the government should be a referee in the economic game, not a participant. In other words, the referee or the sports stadium owner should provide the stadium for play, infrastructure, highways, ports, and whatever. They should provide a legal system with a set of rules for the game, and if somebody's cheating, there's an adjudication. They should supply a money supply so that commerce can proceed. They should negotiate internationally with other nations on behalf of the nation and so forth. So that there is the state does have a role, but that it shouldn't be in the game taking points away from this team and giving it to the other team because this team is taller and faster and it's unfair or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said all regulation is good. No, it's not. And this is actually a point also. There's a lot of regulation bleed, so I can understand some of the attitudes towards cutting back on the scale of the government sector. But the scale they intend talking about for the American economy, this 2025 is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, based on their actions, that it doesn't seem to be a question of just cutting back a little bit. The aim seems to be a corpocracy where the country is run only for and by corporations. So you have a shell of a government, but not one that's powerful enough to question what's going on in these large corporations. So that sounding like a conspiracy theorist there, but that seems to be the actions. Is how much we want to reduce it by will be so that we can show that we're the ones in control. So there seems to be that element of it, at least culturally, and whether or not they do it is another thing. But it's more like a flexing of muscle, perhaps, if they don't. So I hesitate to say interesting. It's going to affect a lot of people, so I don't think it's an interesting development. I think it's a potentially dangerous one.
Chinese curse is what I was thinking of.
A Chinese curse. Go ahead.
Yeah, may you live in interesting times.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's what you mean. Yeah. Indulge me in a little story, because I wrote about this to try as a thought experiment, try and get my head around it. What kind of the sort of, for want of a better term, libertarian type mindset is, or at least libertarian maximalist, right? You take if you want to start from scratch and you go, let's all start an island away from all this ridiculous nonsense, these stupid socialists or these stupid people who want to have some sort of government and taxes, which is theft. Let's go and start our own island. So have a whole bunch of us. We'll buy our own plots of land. We'll have our own little walled gardens, estates, and we'll all be happy there. And of course, some basic things are required once you've got an island there. Unfortunately, you've got to have some sort of laws to stop these, super wealthy people flying over in their helicopters over each other's land. So you've got some basic laws. So you just write rules for that. Okay, so that's still libertarian la la land. Then you need the rubbish collected and so on, little services like that. And at some point, someone says, well, actually, because it's uneven, we don't really know about this. And we also need some lights on the streets, which is really hard to know who has to pay for that. We're just going to make a collective fee for the whole island. How about that? A fee? That sounds like sort of like a tax. Well, it might be. And then, and so on. It escalates. And sooner or later, you have a government that needs to run all of those sorts of things. And whether you like it or not, libertarians will end up in a government-run world, because that currency then becomes the token for, it becomes a public monopoly on money again, all over again. So it always starts again. And I'm sort of like, just stop the crap. You can't not have one. It's just like, what sort of government exactly works, and have that debate. But I feel like it's always in the direction of zero taxes towards zero. No, you don't define exactly how much. Like, what is the limit exactly? Talk about percentages, or talk about what people should pay, not these extremes of zero, or there's these far out extremes that are happening now, where we've just got people talking about absolute anarchy or absolute takeover and complete control by government or corporations, and these are crazy ideas. It never works. You've got to have compromises. It always happens. Am I centrist dad? Am I centrist dad for thinking that?
I want you to push back on Steve. I like it when you do that.
Yeah, no, the pushback was actually articulated kind of by Mike, right? Because that's kind of where my mind was going, is that Steve was kind of putting forward an absolute, and then also Dave kind of, filled in those shoes as well. And I think the thing is let's just remind everybody that, yes, if we've got some radical transformations happening in the world, and you could look at case in point, the president of Argentina, quite possibly the reforms that are going to be coming in the United States. Yes, I get that. Okay. But it's trying to take inventory as a realist that we say that we are in the show, and say, is the government over bloated? Is it excessive at this particular point in time? And the only thing we're advocating for, and I'll say we, or what it seems that this meme or this mind virus is actually perpetuating within society, is to actually reduce the government, to reform it. And I'll remind everybody that John Stuart Mill even was for, this is the cherished forefather of liberalism, was for minimal, let me repeat that, minimal government, not excessive government. And if we can look at the United States right now, we can say, do we have excessive government? That's what Musk is saying, with 400 to 500 government organizations and committees that nobody has a clue what are for. Now, I'm not, prompting up the ignorance of the average citizen, but there's an excessive bloat in the system, and it's drawing on the economies, and it's drawing on the success of America. That's what their point is. That's the pushback.
Yeah,
that's and there's some validity to it as well. The trouble is, like, that's looking at government spending. Now, one thing I'm focusing on is they want to eliminate the deficit, government spending minus taxation. Now, if you do that, what you destroy is fiat money creation. So, and that's sort of ignorance of how the system operates. That's leading us to make it work less well than it would if you didn't try to fiddle with it in the first place.
Yeah.
Ty, you've been quiet for a while. Can I drag you in here?
I think he's tweeting.
You almost look like you're nodding off.
Oh, no, I was just on the internet. I was a little bit. The world, in the real world, people outside of like academics, people don't give a shit about neoclassical economics anyways, right? So they spout off narratives about it and whatnot. But when you talk to like economists that go work at companies, a lot of times they leave their schooling behind, which is almost kind of a blessing because they realize when they get into the field, and I've talked to a lot lately, that all that shit they learned was shit anyways. Fortunately, it doesn't translate into the real world except for like political narrative. But it seems like a big waste of time to go to school to be an economist. I didn't go to school to be an economist, but it seems like a really big waste of 4 years just to go out in the field and have to throw it all away.
I think most econ graduates are hired for their ability to analyze data, not to spout forth a neoclassical model of some sort.
They end up running government. And this is actually one of these little paradoxes. That the reason economics is so dangerous because economists end up working for the government that their theory says shouldn't exist. And they then end up managing elements of the real world according to textbooks, which are wrong. So that's the dilemma that I face. I mean, I now argue that people should not go to university to study economics. They should learn system dynamics, and apply that and learn how to apply it to the economy by reading textbooks themselves, not by, well, you go to do an economic degree, you get taught how to work in equilibrium mathematics all the way. Total waste of time. When you get into the real world, you find you get, as you said, Ty, people stop using that shit, and it's actually a hindrance to how well they can function.
So I had a student at Michigan State University, an undergraduate, reach out to me and asked to have a meeting, a phone call or a Zoom meeting. And we did. And he's very interested in studying economics and system dynamics and going to graduate school and what have you. And I said, well, we can help you do that. I said, but you got to understand, if you cast your lot with the system dynamics, economics folks, well, Steve will like you and I'll like you and Dan.
You won't get a job on the Federal Reserve.
But I said, you're going to be an outcast. You're going to be coloring outside the lines for the economics profession, and trying to get a job as an economist is going to be much more difficult. So I said, you got to be bold and fearless. Forrester would always say that to us. He said, if you're going to work on problems, work on the big ones. And he kept saying, you have to have courage to do what we do, because we always buck the trends. We come up with counterintuitive results. We undermine the conventional wisdom. So if you can't handle that, don't do this. And this student said, I love that. I want to do that. So, okay. I want to make sure you know what you're getting into.
I think he actually got in touch with me, first of all. I recommended you, Mike, for the course. I've got a feeling.
Okay, good.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, we need more courage like that. But there's, the majority, this is where paradigms become such a huge issue. People get locked into a particular way of thinking, And the paradigm in economics doesn't shift in the way that paradigms ultimately do in genuine sciences, because generational change doesn't occur. And we're very much this has been my life in many ways. I was a rebel at the age of 19 or 18 and over economics, and was intimidated by the professors to some extent, even though I took them on, but that they must know more than me. Fast forward now, I'm one of the professors. I know most of the other professors around. They didn't break out of the bloody envelope. They know less than I do. And consequently, what they hang on to is the ideological vision that they don't even realize is ideology about capitalism being a perfect system. And they can always find a couple of turkeys in the current crop of students to feel the same way. They are the ones they appoint as their successors. So you don't get that generational change that happens in a real science. And that's why there's so much lock-in. It's why I've given up on universities as a way of changing the nature of economics. It won't happen.
So if you look at Steve's pictures from the days when he was a radical, he had the great head of Einstein hair. It was awesome.
I had my own personal afro.
So good.
Can I be so bold to go around and see if, as a nice experiment, based on some of this chat I'm seeing as well about all sorts of I hesitate to say quick fixes. I don't want to talk about quick fixes, but there's if you've got the economy as it is right now, or capitalism as it is right now, and you had to pick one policy. So we're not talking about ideology or systems or anything like that. We would pick one policy that we think could have the most beneficial change. And I know you're systems thinkers, so you're going to rail against this, but I think it's just a good one to see which one you think would have the best net benefit. I mean, obviously I have my own pet policy, but I saw some people throwing things in the chat, and I just wanted to see what you guys think. I saw LTV in there. Obviously, we've talked in the past about UBI. People have talked about job guarantees. Just go around. Maybe Ty, can I start with you, or are you still thinking about what yours might be?
I'm just finding a picture of Steve, but
oh, thank you.
That's the important work.
That's the important work. But the one thing, and I'll just a buzz catch-all, is reduce the size of the financial sector in capitalist society.
So what is your policy that does that? The Tobin tax? What would do that?
It has to be practical, because we see that people like Trump can come into power. You can just sign an executive order and shut down these companies. We're doing it in Canada, right? We forced all the offices of TikTok outside of Canada. So we politically, we have the power if we want to do it. Do we have the political balls to do it? That's another question. So you can shut down big financial firms that are really just parasitic on the economy, and it would cause a lot of pain in the beginning. It would throw markets into a tailspin, but ultimately it is taking a portion of the national income for itself and removing it from the household sector. And that is the biggest problem in capitalism we face today, is a shrinking income share for the common worker. That is the bottom line. The proof is in the details. You can go to Fred, which is the Federal Reserve website. It's a database of all economic data. You can type in wage share of income and look at that chart. And if that chart doesn't tell you there's a problem with modern capitalism, I don't know what will.
Mine would be a modern debt jubilee. I mean, I've got all my stuff about the ecological issues as well, but that's coming back again. It's all around the same point Ty's talking about. We've let far too much private debt accumulate. Private debt's created by banks. It's created for finance and asset price speculation. And this is one of the little things about complex systems and system dynamic thinking. When I first built my model of Minsky's financial instability hypothesis, I had only firms doing the borrowing. And yet the emergent property of that model was that a high level of private debt caused a lower level of workers' share of income. So there's actually a direct logical complex systems link between higher private debt and lower workers' income. So we've got to get, thank you very much. That's the one. The funny thing is that photograph, if I can embellish.
I have spent half the show tracking that down.
Shut the thing down for a second. Yeah, that was me. And the funny thing is, That was like the Three Amigos. I got that particular. I'll see if I can find the original photograph.
Look like
Because that
Art
was
Garfunkel. Were you
well, that was
modeling it on Art Garfunkel?
I didn't have quite the same high pitched voice. Okay. But those are three mates at a 21st birthday party. And what they had is we had at one end was the host, and the host had a bow tie, a dinner jacket, and very tight hair, and a totally anal personality. I mean, the bloke whose party it was had a black jacket, a white tie, laid back, lovely, lovely bloke. Died of chemical poisoning, unfortunately, in his job as a chemical engineer later on, but a wonderful, wonderful guy, but more relaxed. And there's me, no shirt, and no shirt, no jacket, no tie, hair all over the place, big smile. It's the classic Three Amigos. I'll see if I can find it and do revenge on Ty's Revenge there. Chat away.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're up to Mike. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Steve is on. I do think that for a lot of people, if you gave them a debt jubilee, let's say you paid off their credit card, they just run it up again. So I think you have to combine a debt jubilee with some sort of
they call the pill. Restraints.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, sorry. Right. So Steve is right. So it has to be combined with something like that. And I do think a universal income is probably should be looked at, possibly replacing the overall labyrinth of welfare programs or what have you, or not. I'm not entirely sure, but it cries out for modeling and analysis. But yes, the role capitalism is the worst system possible, except for all the others, as what Winston Churchill or whatever said.
They were talking about democracy, though, not capitalism.
Okay, so we sort of pivoted there. But the point is, you got to get rid of the excesses, right? The extreme Thomas Piketty thing, the extreme distribution of wealth, and instead of the CEO earning 10 times the guy in the mailroom salary, it's 400 times or whatever. These sorts of things where the guy in the mailroom or the gal in the mailroom can't afford to live, and the CEO has gold-plated toilet seats. That's got to be stopped. Oh,
like I said, guys.
Which one's the radical? One of these things is not like the other.
Yeah. Which one went on to become a heterodox economist, I wonder, or a bass guitarist? I'm not sure. That is brilliant.
No. Yeah, I know. That's priceless photograph.
Yeah.
Okay. Stop
I'm
embarrassing
glad you
me.
can't find any of my photos from the 80s, Ty. That would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So who are we up to? Daniel, you've got a single policy.
Philip Brill's comment's a good one there.
Oh, go on. Before we get there.
A single policy. I mean, I do really like Steve's debt jubilee. I'd continue the debt jubilee with something that's not quite a UBI. It cannot leave the mindset in the people that they're getting something that is a free handout. But I think that the stay in place model, which would mean like we don't need to create jobs for the sake of jobs. They are a reflection of energy, like Steve had said, with GDP. And so might be a bit of a surprise. I'm actually pretty bullish on a command economy in times of crisis.
The sci-fi writer Ian Banks, who was quite famously left, but he said he wasn't left for now, in the sense of now he was writing about the future. He was like, I'm very bullish on the future being a command economy, very, very left. And he was well ahead of the luxury, what is it called? Fully loaded luxury communism stuff from Novara. So, I often think of that, and I think there doesn't seem like I am often confused by people who talk about because I'm not a Marxist. I don't really get it in terms of like the modern economy, because it seems out of date. I often think, what do people mean when they talk about command economies? Because in the past they've been terrible, but what differences would be good about it now, Dan? That we learned from history, as it were, if you had a command economy for things.
Well, I don't think you lose the feedback of the democratic voice. I don't think that becomes obsolescent. I think it becomes a servant for the people. And there's a difference if there's a strong command economy that's run with the most efficient military precision. This is where our most efficient systems are for building infrastructure and bridges and running organizations is going to come out of the science of military, right? And I think that considering the resource shortages and the challenges that we have ahead, that there's investment in that renewed, reimagined version of the military complex that would serve the people domestically, primarily, in each individual country, I think is something to really look at. But I think going back to what Steve said many shows again, and probably reiterated, is that, at some point, our underlying narrative and description of the problem that lies ahead of us with climate change is something that we're just, unfortunately, like Steve said, we're going to have to get our hand burnt and then have to react accordingly.
It'll be a command economy. Philip Brule's comment there, by the way. Philip, if you haven't seen it before, search the word Mondragon, Mondragon. That's a region in Spain which is entirely, not entirely, but most of the companies there are worker cooperatives established by a Catholic priest about 60 or 70 years ago. I think actually possibly even before the Spanish Civil War, but about that time. And it actually has been the fastest growing part of the world economy, apart from China, for quite some time. And what you get is a form of cohesion and innovation at the same time in one little region. So it's quite fascinating. It is the sort of thing we should be talking about. The God entrepreneur. There are some examples of them, but they get replaced by their children, and they're nowhere near as good.
Yeah.
Do we manage to get around? We've done all of our one-hit policy roundups, so that's good. This year coming up, Ty, you've given me the most thought on what's coming up when you did that analysis of, among other things, what happens to the price of Bitcoin when you map it onto the deficit spending. And I want to talk about some of the insights you and Doug had when you were looking ahead 25 and 26, just in general. Whatever you want to have a go at would be good, especially you were looking at tariffs as well.
Yeah, so we actually run now 5 nonlinear models. As you know, Steve and Mike will know, these models are very sensitive to initial conditions. So we wanted to really have 5 sets of models with varying assumptions, right? And we wanted to have kind of we see on the news when there's a hurricane in Florida, and it shows like the North American model and the European model and all the tracks, and it gives you a cone of uncertainty, right? So that's kind of how we're approaching it with our national models. And 2025, all things equal, without any, if we discount any changes in tariffs, corporate taxes, deficit spending, it's a pretty even-keeled year. So we're kind of predicting with the models, all 5 are in agreement, that we're actually almost at a top of unemployment. So we might reach about 5% unemployment and start slowly going down throughout 2025. And we're actually, all things equal, and we will encounter exogenous shocks. So this model isn't, a fortune teller situation. Wars can change things. Interest rates can change things.
This is not investment advice. Stocks do go up as well as down.
Yes, that's correct, right?
Legal department.
Things are looking rather promising for the U.S. economy in late 2025, and 2026 looks really, really good at this point, barring any exogenous issues, right? We have modeled different variations. So we use the CME data, which is a futures market of where the policy rate's going to go in the U.S. We've used that baked into our model, but we've also done variations on it, how policy changes will affect the economy. Monetary policy is effective, despite what the heterodox says. It's just not effective very fast, and there's temporal lags. So changing the interest rate now doesn't change inflation now or GDP or output, but it does change it down the road, right? We just don't quite understand how the Fed doesn't quite understand how it changes it. We've modeled in tariffs, and at this point, we're not too worried about tariffs for the U.S. economy depending if Trump implements them now when he gets into power on January 20th, or he does it down the road in September when he readjusts the tax schedule for the U.S. So he could very well, and Mike kind of landed on this with his art of what was the name of his book? The Art of Negotiating. Art of the Deal, right? Where he is quite aggressive in his stance and he doesn't go through with it. But theoretically, if he was going to take it to that level, we kind of postulated that he'd have economic advisors around him where he would offset it with corporate tax cuts, right? So in that sense, it would be minimal on the U.S. economy. There's a question on how prices would be passed off to consumers. That's up in the air. So we've kind of modeled that, and it's kind of zeroed out to nothing. Our biggest concern is obviously deficit spend, just government spending in general, right? We have to remember that on average, the U.S. economy spends 35% of its GDP as government spending. Year after year after year. During COVID, it went up to 47%, and then has slowly drifted back down to 35%, which will be 2024. That's our biggest concern. And so we have been kind of looking at different asset classes and looking at like deficit spending and how that really affects these different assets. This is some of our work for the Bitcoiners out there, because Doug and I battle these guys all the time, along with the gold bugs. And our opinion right now is Bitcoin has, all those, Bitcoin has the government to thank, essentially, right? Through the value of Bitcoin is driven by federal deficits, essentially, among other things, right? So that's kind of the insights we got going on there. But looking forward to 2020,
what are people doing? What can you imagine that's going on behavior there wise? So people are
money. They've got more money to buy a speculative asset with. That's fundamentally free money.
So when you deficit spend, we'll go back to the very basics of MMT. You are injecting financial assets into the private sector. Those financial assets, reserves, money can be converted and spent into other financial assets, which will boost the prices of them. So if you have an expansion of financial assets from government spending, it's going to be effectively inflationary on other financial assets in the economy. And what Doug and I are trying to say is Bitcoin has the government to thank for its existence. Fiat currency is the driver of those kind of speculative financial assets. Without, that solid government spending, you don't have Bitcoin. You just don't have it. It would be non-existent. We wouldn't have the net financial assets in the private sector economy to drive such. Let's be blunt here. Bitcoin, those are fuckery assets, right? They drive up energy costs and they serve no purpose to society. They can't be used for basic transactions because they fluctuate too much. They're not a safe store of value. You might as well just go buy gold because they fluctuate too much. They're a fuckery asset, and they come out of net financial assets from the government. So I just try to tell Bitcoiners, don't ever shit on government spending because it's driving your asset right now.
I was going to ask, do you find the same relationship with the price of gold as in your graph?
Yeah. So, and that's another argument we make to the gold bugs out there. It's like the value of gold in itself is supported by the decree of government spending their own currency. They could just say gold is valuable, the government, and gold is valuable, right? But there has to be a transmission of that value from the government. And right now that transmission is deficit spending, right? You're injecting financial assets. People in the private sector convert it into whatever safe store value they want, i.e. gold, i.e. Bitcoin, i.e. Equities, right? All of that is driven by deficit spending because you're increasing the financial assets of the private sector. I'm not saying it's good and I'm not saying it's bad, because there's a big argument. Yeah.
So can you, now I don't know if this would work in modeling, but can you see with the rise of Bitcoin that the rate of growth of gold in relation to the new kid in town, which is Bitcoin, could you see that the rate of growth of gold, in relation to the government spending, is actually not increasing as much because of the fact that Bitcoin is the new kid in town? Like, is there a way to hypothesize that and test that?
So I haven't tested it, but we can do a simple thought experiment. Gold is one of the safest stores of value that people in the investment community go to as a hedge. Bitcoin is nowhere near. Bitcoin is popular right now, but a serious investor, when they want to hedge against risks, they turn to golds or U.S. treasuries, right? Yeah. Long or short, right? Those are traditionally and still are. Bitcoin it's popular right now. It's been popularized, but serious investors know what it is. Fucking nothing, right? At the end of the day, and they have no way of knowing it. Okay, that's my safe store of value. The next day it drops by 43%. That is not it's trash, right? It's essentially trash. And that goes back to one of my issues with the fight. What it does do is it's propping up a larger and larger financial sector, because now we have yet another financial asset out there that has to be maintained by managers, maintained by big financial institutions, right? That all require a profit or a share of the national income to exist, which then takes a share from somewhere else, i.e. the productive firms in the economy that actually make the things we need, or the households, right, that generate wages and they have to pay their bills.
And you're going to get more data on that, I think, in the next year and a half then, if there is a proper Doge that takes a lot of deficit spending out of the economy and equity out of the economy, you would think?
What do you mean, take equity out of the economy?
Well, so if you're not spending into the economy, if you're not deficit spending, basically, at such a high level, then you're going to take equity out of the economy.
Exactly.
You're going to reduce financial equity. Yeah.
And I suspect Trump will have smart enough advisors around him, because this isn't a secret to the financial sector, right? It's a narrative that government spending is bad for the financial sector, but people within the sector, and I talk to a lot of them, they love government spending. That's a good thing. That's money, right? That's money. They like money. The more of it, the merrier. So I suspect Trump will have advisors around him saying, okay, Musk is cool and all, he builds nice rockets, but be careful with these cuts, right? And also, let's go to the political reality of the cuts. The $2 trillion he wants to cut. There's only $1.3 trillion in discretionary spending in the U.S. Budget, right? So realistically, it's never going to hit that $2 trillion mark, and I doubt it's there's going to be much of a reduction. Maybe a couple $100 billion at best, if you really think about it realistically and practically.
Yeah, because the states, it's the individual states that actually have the spending of the government, really, compared to the federal side of things, it turns out, which I didn't know. But of course, that makes more sense.
States have their own federal budgets. They also receive funding from the federal government itself, right? So those could be non-discretionary spending packages. And so it would be we go back to the practicality of it. The federal government can't just stop, even like the funding that goes to Texas. Okay, we know Texas is very conservative and very anti-fiscal policy spending. But if you were to go to that state and say, we're going to cut off your federal funding, there'd be an uproar from their primary base, right? So in practical terms, it's not really possible to cut that much. But if there was a concern that I had for 2025 and Trump, it's that. Not the taxes, not the tariffs, but simply the cuts that he's proposing, because it drives our economy and it sends in net financial assets to the private sector.
So reality will prevail, just because, as Jay Mills said in the comments there, Trump's a narcissist, not an ideologue, and as soon as he gets wind of the fact that there'll be a problem, he'll be like, hang on, this will hurt people. So
it's going to be fun to see how long the happy couples last, by the way. Trump and Musk and Vivek and a few of the others in Vance. If things start going in different directions, you said that if I had to vote on what factor is going to dominate what happens when there is a conflict, Trump's narcissism wins.
Well,
Yeah.
he's also a
You
lame
can't.
duck.
Sorry?
He's
Right.
also a lame duck. He can't run
That
again.
doesn't matter to Trump.
So
That doesn't matter to Trump. Okay, there's the lame duckery. You can't get it. He's got all three houses of the political system. He probably wants to go out and I mean, you start thinking about, even if you're a narcissist, you start thinking about death when you crack past 70. He's approaching 80. I don't think he's not going to worry about the lame duck side of things. Does it have any practical impact, the lame duck thing? Does it restrain what you can actually achieve in any practical sense? Or is it?
I think it's the inertia of the fact that people are moving on to the next thing because they know you're not going to be around. So they start looking at their careers. So it's cultural as well as that's what it seems to be from an administration point of view. That's what I thought.
Comment there about if they forget how chaotic the first admin was, and it's the 2025 project as well. There's a lot of crazy ideology coming our way next year.
A lot of crazy shit kicking around.
Yeah.
So and again, I hesitate to say, "Oh, this will be interesting." I don't want interesting because, frankly, I've lived through interesting, and it's not always.
It's not what it's cracked up to be, is it?
It's not what it's cracked up to be.
Chinese
Quite boring.
It's very subtle. May you live in interesting times.
Absolutely.
That's one hell of a soul curse.
And you're exactly. I mean, I can make life interesting enough for myself without all the exogenous shocks, to borrow your terms, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So, which is why I signed up stupidly to. I'm going to name drop, aren't I? I signed up stupidly to a casting thing as on a whim to get into a movie because I live in the UK here. I live near Elstree and Leviston. Lots of big American movies are made there. And managed to, I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about this. They haven't said don't. But I'm getting to be an extra in January on the new Batman film. I have no idea what I'm going to do yet.
Maybe hang from rafters? Yeah.
And what's that?
Maybe hang from rafters.
I don't know. Yeah, they're gonna. Hopefully, they'll put me in the Batmobile. I don't even. But yeah, I have no idea what the role is. Probably in a crowd, right? But hopefully, I'll be able to freeze frame the part of the movie forever. That there's that blob. That's me. We'll see. I've no idea. It's gonna be hilarious.
So are we gonna read the top commenters before we go?
We want to read top chatters, don't we? Okay, who's going to come on? Who am I going to?
Look, I better do it. I mean, Sean Damrotowski, Economics in One Lesson, Michael D'Souza Cruz, Tony Wilson, Paul Traynor BSC, Murphy Pluck Me, okay, Mariel Ropel, God is in the Details, Victo, Ghost on the Half Shell, Web Freaks, Algo Rhythm, Kip, James McInnes, Stephen Hinton, The Herald of Change, Entropy Juggler, Against the State, Andrew Sullivan, D. Smith, Dadson Worldwide, Eddie Chu, UBI Economics, Michael Griffith, No One, Jeff Little, Nick Thiel, Adelo Aleo, Ronald Vormwald, is that from Harry Potter? Downshift, Brady Nils, Marie, Danelle, Michael Newton, Kevin Tui, Jay Mills, Ian Pereira, Serenity, Tatia, Darren Lawson Hoskin, D. Bruce, Chandra Welch, Circularly Economy, HB, and Bob Liore.
Serenity gets special mention.
I thought the same thing about. I thought the Harry Potter thing too when I saw that.
Yeah. I've got a feeling.
Or whatever his name was.
Larry Summers wasn't there. What happened to Larry? Somebody.
No comment.
Yeah.
No comment.
So what's the Christmas deal for you guys? Are you all at home? Are you away? What are you going to be? I'm at home. I'm not going anywhere, as in not going to family or anything like that. I'm going to be here in London.
I think I'm going to meet Steve in London, right, for the
Are you having a Christmas dinner?
In January, not December. That's January.
Or first week of January, or whatever it is. Yeah,
it's been great. That's Kerry King. So I'm off to. I'm actually visiting. I'm visiting Ty and Dan for the very first time before Christmas. So seeing those guys and the weekend after next, I think it is. Maybe even next weekend.
I think it's next.
And then I'm back in Amsterdam for Christmas, and next year I'm going to be teaching at the University of Amsterdam, as it happens, and based here for a year, which I'm looking forward to. Oh, pardon me.
Well, if you pass through London, let me know if you want to have a beer. There's there's still an open tab for you because of the deficit spending in Australia that you helped wangle to get me some money. So I probably owe you a lot for.
I can
picked
handle
up that in 2007. Still Still got that in my back pocket. No, I haven't. But yeah, no, I'd be happy to have a beer with you, Steve. So yeah, but otherwise, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation around the table. Americans have had their Thanksgiving. That's when all the political talk happens. But in the UK, it's around the Christmas table. I think is that how it works? Yeah. So we've got that to look forward to. And now I've got lots of ammo. So thank you. Look, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to head off very shortly. So thank you all for tuning in. Our top chatters, it's great to have you. And we look forward to catching up with you guys all in the new year. I think that's it from me. What have you guys got? Any best wishes for anybody, and any reason why they should need to come back in January that we can think of in 5 seconds? I don't know. There's got to be.
Yes. Make sure you come back in January. Jay Mills is here now. He's our #1 chat troll. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of fuckery from him in the new year. And this show is going to be bigger and better than ever. It's going to be huge. It's going to be great.
It's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you in January.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.